Yeah, in case.
So many friends.
Yeah, I see so many familiar faces.
Hi, Manuel.
Hi, Manuel.
Good.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, all you guys in Berlin, for having your lunch. And I'm having my drink, which is water in a Japanese cup I bought at Tokyo Airport.
And I'm having my wine at lunchtime in Berlin.
That's
and
Berlin.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe I'll just say this super quick also about Service Design Drinks Berlin. So myself and Adam, who's also here, depending on your view, you might be able to see him if he waves. And there's 3 others as well, and we do Service Design Drinks in Berlin. And we've taken that over from Manuel actually in another group that was doing it, but we've been running these kind of service design events like the Global Service Jam for six or so years in Berlin. And we're super excited also to do this Twin Cities event and really share with just more than the community that's kind of close around us and get these different perspectives, and really excited now that you brought this to us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I have my friends as well I would like to introduce. So Eunice, Felix, Grisha, but yeah, they can just say hi. All of them are not on Zoom. They're in the space. Thanks a lot, Dee, for introducing Adam and Mati as well. So Dee, would you like to tell something about yourself now?
I'm Dee. The personal little story that I chose to share was the thing that kind of excites me most about my last year. I did this little holiday for myself where I was working. I got to go to San Francisco to run some workshops and do some work, and I was working with all these big tech companies and this especially big, huge social media company. And my brain was all focused on make money, engage users, keep users in your product. And then so I was in San Francisco, and then I decided to take a vacation and ride a motorbike by myself up the coast from San Francisco to Portland, which is 1,200 kilometers. I had to look it up actually yesterday to put this in there. But it was just such a stark difference between working, like having my whole brain focused on how to make money and get users and things for this big tech company. And then just being alone in nature, having like new experiences and being completely unattached from the digital world and from the business world and from the money world. And so that was really strong in my mind, and also just a personal story about me. But yeah, that's a theme that I'd like to kind of see and talk about in this fireside chat, this conversation as well. And what about you, Nav? What's that picture?
Yeah, I just wanted to show my beautiful hometown where I grew up first in 18 years of my life. So we thought of like bringing these 2 cities together and people from these 2 cities together. The whole idea of this Service Design Bring Singapore and Service Design Bring Berlin is to bring communities from 2 cities of design and innovation together. And also the point of realization for this topic for me was also watching Social Dilemma on Netflix. And then you realize what it is doing, like 30, 40, 50 people are controlling behavior of 2 billion people. Like this is power. And that's why we have written like superpower is a choice. That's not the right sentence, but the power of superpower lies in why and how we use it. Power does not have any preference. And I think this question is all the more relevant now, and also like in big ways, like I think Randy's working with Grab where they're impacting millions and millions of people, or maybe billions. But for me as well, running a small design firm, like when we cannot say no to if a chicken brand comes to us to kind of help them in their service, or a steaks brand, and these are the everyday choices that we have to make about our working. And that's where we thought like this would be a very good kind of discussion topic and see what we can come out with. And I just was searching for what does ethics mean, and these are the moral principles and or something that govern our behavior. And I think the key thing that I kind of sussed out from it, ethics is about sense of right or wrong. And it is very subjective how you see what is right or wrong. And how I see what is right or wrong, that is also kind of shaped by the community we are in, whether design community or the community as large. And I realized our actions or our behavior is delivered, like we always facing some kind of dilemma. That shall I do this or not? Like I talked about my chicken brand, or we have some kind of a bias towards something. So this is just to kind of set the tone for what is there to come. I think our talking is done. We took little, like maybe 4 minutes more, but we started 4 minutes later. So I think I will now pass it over to kind of Randy and Clive. But before that, just to give you a sense to all of you who are here, we have 123 people now. So we have this program in like 3 sections. One is getting to know our guests. So they'll be speaking about themselves and a bit about their views and ethics. And then we have a fireside chat, which Dia and I will be moderating, but it's open for questions. So you guys can keep on, I think, putting your questions in the chat. And to wrap it all up, we'll have closing words from Randy and Clive towards the end. So that's our evening will look like.
Hello. Hi. What you see on your screen is an image of a bottle of Trump premium vodka. And in 2005, I think, I decided to take this role, like a really junior role in the design studio of Milton Glaser. After having like run my own design studio and things, but I was just, I really admired his role in the design profession, and in a way as like a kind of maybe philosopher and voice of reason in design, even more so than the work itself or something. Although I admired like a lot of the business success he had over time as like an entrepreneur. So I took this role in the studio and was doing pretty like basic communication design work, but having a lot of fun and getting to go in the studio and be around Milton Glaser every day. And then one day we got this project to work on packaging design and the launch of Trump vodka. They have to remember this was 2005, so it wasn't the dear God, who is this buffoon that's like holding a mirror back at how absurd humanity is. It was more like who's this idiot from pop culture that like no one really likes or cares about, and like why are we doing this work for him? And his like goons would come and pick up his work with like their microphones in their ear, like Secret Service agents.
Back in 2005.
I think someone is like not muted, and we can hear some conversation.
So I share this little tidbit, a lens into my professional path, but I think it's quite interesting how the perspective changes in a way. I think like at the time we thought this was funny and silly work, and maybe it was odd that Milton Glaser would choose to take this work on. Like that's weird. And in hindsight, it's kind of embarrassing to have ever been associated with it. Right? And so there's this interesting thing about what we perceive maybe as being, acceptable, when we're maybe have a less critical lens, and then when you start to look at things maybe differently over time. Yeah.
Do you want the next slide?
Oh yeah, I think that's all for my quick intro. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe this should be 2 minutes, right, Dee? This should be a quickie, right?
Yeah, this is a quick one.
Yeah, okay. A little bit about myself. Well, me being quite a privileged white guy working in tech, I think like anyone, I really enjoy wearing my cockroach costume and having a overpriced organic flat white with Oatly, which probably in a neighborhood where this third wave coffee shop is, not a lot of the ingenious people could actually afford to drink. I also talk a lot about sustainability and our impact on the world. But the other day, I also noticed that an original concept for the Berlin Airport app has actually launched recently, which is, if you're from Germany and if you follow the story of Berlin Airport, it's quite amazing, actually. I think no one would have thought this ever happens. Actually, when I created the app or the concept in 2016. I thought no one will ever use apps or phones anymore once the airport launches. But no, both have launched. But at least we can think about if this has been doing my part for sustainability or not. I don't know. So if people fly a bit more post-COVID, maybe I'm to blame a bit as well. And also now being a father to little Max here, of course, I'm also thinking a lot about, these ethical choices I've made along my career path. How will they maybe affect my little son? And would I do something differently in the future, maybe, and not just only talk about it, and maybe take some more concrete action? Yeah, I think that was my brief intro in a nutshell.
I love how both of you, I don't know if that was intentional, but both of you just reference like these dilemmas, these like guilt almost, these choices where it's like, okay, I want to work on great stuff. I want to work on interesting stuff. I want to have a good experience myself. I want to enjoy my coffee. I want to work on a campaign that's going to be seen by lots of people, or just learn from a master. But then maybe to do that, I have to also, I don't know, I feel like I'm sacrificing something, or I feel like, am I really doing the right thing? I'm not sure. These dilemmas, I feel like, and these feelings are super, super at the core of this whole conversation. And I like how you both have this kind of, you both brought this out in a little 2-minute intro.
Definitely. There's nothing like a bit of self-guilt from two middle-aged white men, I think, to start off the spirit of this talk.
Yeah. Well noticed. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
So I think we'll have first Randy going to talk about his take on design ethics, and then we'll have Clive. So over to you, Randy.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay, so I'll make this quick. I feel like where is the in the comments? I feel like somewhere in here I'm about to get schooled, which is almost exactly what I hoped for in this session. So what I'm about to share with you is not from a place of any perceived expertise by any means. Maybe the opposite, but rather a level of comfort talking about how I have no idea what I'm doing, and would like to sort of take a more self-reflective, view. So I'm trying to be really like transparent. So a couple. What's illustrated here is really this sort of 3-part Venn diagram that I created for myself maybe about 2.5 years ago. I was leaving a professional role at an organization that I quite liked for a lot of reasons, but also just wasn't particularly engaged with for the long run. And it had some funny ethical, or what felt like ethical run-ins myself in that organization, because we were dealing in contemporary art sales. And if anyone's not familiar with contemporary art sales, it's one of the last unregulated industries with like major assets, and you can move, anything where you can easily move large amounts of money around without it being detected. It has associations with, other nefarious things, whether you want to admit it or not. So hi to all the friends in Berlin who are, whose friends work in art galleries. Especially the blue chip ones. And then to our friends in Singapore, there's a warehouse that's, here in Singapore that sits actually just outside customs, and there's these in the major art markets all around the world where you can buy you can buy a painting in Hong Kong and park it in that warehouse in Singapore, and then eventually sell it to someone in France and then ship it to Europe, and it will have never, crossed any borders in that transaction. So that's interesting. It's not why I came here, but I was trying to understand like what were the things that were important to me that felt like they had economic opportunity, and where I felt like if I wasn't making some positive contribution in them, maybe I wasn't, spending my time on the planet maybe in a way that I could be proud of. And so I was like looking at these things that I cared about, and identified really these 3 big areas, like the climate crisis, economic inclusion, especially coming from American context. It was largely had to do with minorities and minority access to the sort of foundational parts of economic growth, and then healthy living. This is something I've been using as sort of like a decision framework in a way to prioritize some things. So I like sold off a bunch of stuff I own and assets and like tried to, align them with these. I stopped a construction project I was working on because I was going to have to rent it for too much in order to make the math work. So we stopped it and redesigned the project so that it could be more affordable for people. So it's just some interesting like filters, and it becomes important as I think about then what I do in my main professional work like day to day. So you can go to like next slide. There's this project that I remember doing it was actually this whole course when I was in graduate school. And the instructor had challenged us to think, like the question was really like, how can design sort of touch people emotionally or like move people emotionally? But the simple framework I've ended up passing through a bunch of things since. So when I marry the previous, diagram and this diagram, it informs how I think about like spending my time or energy. So it's really like, how do I apply this decision-making framework to benefit or have the least like negative impact on people that I know in a really like intimate way? How about on my community, right? These are people that like I may know or they may know me, maybe not by name, but I interact with and experience like on a semi-frequent basis. And then on like humanity at large. And so this goes maybe to like a superpower image. And I think that working in technology products, there's this maybe additional responsibility in a way because what is so attractive about them is the way that you can make small actions and have like really big impact. And then what is so dangerous about them is that some of these small actions can have such big impact. And sometimes it's very difficult to know in advance what that impact might be. But then sometimes it's also maybe easier to kind of like put the blinders on and not think about that downstream impact being something you're responsible for. Yeah. So when I thought about both these things, this really informed my choices actually to move to Southeast Asia and to join Grab, not because I think that Grab has somehow all of these things like resolved and tied up in some bow. In fact, maybe not entirely true. You can next slide, but I'll explain to you what Grab is so you kind of understand and can place it in relationship to some other things, especially for those of us in Berlin. You can skip this slide, it's fine. I kind of talked over these same points. So Grab is this, like if you were to go on the ground, this photos from Jakarta in Indonesia. And in the major cities in Southeast Asia, especially, there's kind of this sea of green that is basically the presence of Grab. And also our main competitor in Indonesia also is like a green brand color. So it's like, kind of magnifies this effect. But our Grab started as a ride hailing platform, or really like taxi hailing system, turned into ride hailing on 2-wheel and 4-wheel. So we do a lot of motorbike rides. So the passenger hops on the back and takes their helmet from the driver. But it's quickly expanded into this more like super app concept in a number of services and verticals. So if you can flip to the next slide, I won't talk through them all, but what was important and attractive to me is that a number of these areas are opportunities for interventions that I felt like could improve people's experience around things that are related to the negative impact in the climate crisis, healthy living over time, as well as economic inclusion. And so I saw the potential for this thing that brought together like many of my interests in areas that I wanted to make positive impact, and thought, there was something intriguing there. And I combined that with maybe the intentions of the founders and things. There's something that I felt quite strongly positive about, to say, the potential for positive impact through my direct contribution is substantial. So then the challenge was, can I actually figure that out? One, is that true? And can I pull it off in any meaningful way? So next slide. And maybe one of the things that feels like so important and timely about this is that, this service that maybe elsewhere you would describe as some combination between like, Deliveroo, Monzo, Revolut, Uber, some insurance provider. Like, I'm not sure how you can, like, I can relate it for, those of you in Berlin, but it's like so many different kind of businesses in one. Was also the customers it's for. So we serve customers across 8 markets in Southeast Asia. the largest of which is Indonesia, which is of course the fourth most populous country in the world, fastest growing of the most populous countries in the world in terms of its economic development. Also the largest Muslim population anywhere in the world, in any country. It's very interesting, like cultural differences and experience there. But basically the story of Southeast Asia and the growth of Southeast Asia, both in its population and its economic power, point to scaled impact in a bunch of these things really quickly now and in really meaningful ways over the long term. So it looked to me like an opportunity to sort of see firsthand the challenges faced by population in developing economy, primarily if you look outside of Singapore, and how that relates to what seems like the right thing to do, yeah, and where there's the opportunity for a great amount of impact. So hey, I'll kind of leave it with you there to just kind of put some of this in context. That's kind of the universe I've been swimming in and thinking about. So maybe that's helpful as we chat more about the ethics in our work at scale.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Randy. Yeah.
It's exactly the world that's swimming around in my brain the last years, and what I'd love to talk about too.
And again, I believe 5 minutes. Yeah, should we try to do it with 5 minutes?
I have a little timer here for my.
Who's got the coolest time timer? You
Awesome.
might be used to this one. I'll just set it to 5, and being my German self, I'll try to keep on time. We'll see what happens. That's being my German self. Being my half British self, I've always also been told to watch my language a bit. So I might need to censor myself sometimes if there's a strong word. Otherwise, I won't really say much more for now. Right. How would I like to go in there? So really, I think, let's be honest here, guys and girls. We're all hypocrites. Next, please. As designers, we talk an awful lot about the empathy we've got, especially as UX or service designers. We say empathy is at the core of everything we do. Next, please. We approach our projects and our work in a human-centered way. So humans are always at the center of everything we do. Next, please. And really, we're in this world to solve problems, meaningful problems for our users, for our businesses. And I think we like to hear ourselves talking about words like that quite often. Next, please. We love headlines like this. Next, please. But actually, I guess a lot of us are stuck in a rut somewhere like this. I won't read it to you, you can read it yourself. So I assume quite a lot of us are here like designer A and designer B. So next, please. And we choose to work for some real cool tech companies. I mean, Dee mentioned it already. Maybe without thinking too much about the effects we actually have when our hordes of Patagonia wearing, flat white drinking armies invade these new places. This is a nice example from Kreuzberg, an area of Berlin, which is, I live 5 minutes from Kreuzberg, is traditionally a very, it used to be quite a poor district. It used to be right in the area where the Berlin Wall went. So it wasn't a desirable area to live. So during the Cold War, a lot of squatters moved there. A lot of migrants, specifically from the Turkish community, settled down in Kreuzberg. And over the years, it's been like a hodgepodge of people that maybe wouldn't actually make it somewhere else, or that went there specifically. Maybe you could compare it a bit like Stokescroft in Bristol or Brixton in London. Oopsie, and that's my camera going in here. So definitely an area that's becoming more trendy as well. But that also has a history and indigenous population, for want of a better word, that might be someone else. And actually, in Kreuzberg, people actually managed to defer Google from setting up shop there, for example. But I'd say if we would have had the opportunity to work there with some of the brightest minds in our industry, we probably would have went there. Yeah, so again, probably a lot of us would have taken that Google job anyway and would have moved to this campus, which I think is quite cool, has not happened, but there's a debate if that's actually helpful or not. Next slide, please. We might choose to work for something like Airbnb, which has Lottie and another really cool design systems in place. You've got the brightest minds working there. A UX's dream, I think. And I myself have used Airbnb in many of the cool places around the world, be it Bristol, Copenhagen, probably people coming to Berlin. They want to feel the authentic Berlin and go to an Airbnb, maybe without thinking too much what it actually does to the neighborhoods, specifically in Berlin. So we've got blocks of houses. There's a nice data project visualizing that as well, that are 3/4 of Airbnb flats and maybe 1/4 of an area where you can actually have rental space available to normal people. But nonetheless, I'd assume a lot of us would actually take the chance, work for Airbnb and actually use their services as well. Next, please. Same would go for Facebook. I mean, who would, maybe nowadays it's changed a little bit, but I'd say a few years ago, everyone would have jumped at the chance to work for Facebook. And it's interesting to see a lot of these people that had sort of epiphanies, like Tristan Harris, who worked for Google, who's now part of the Humane Tech movement, or actually the guy who invented the like button, who now deletes Facebook completely after he's seen the effects it has had on his son, which I thought was an interesting one. Next, please. I'd say we'd also, we'd probably be quite happy to work for cool companies like Foodora and Deliveroo, maybe a similar service to Grab. I use their services. There's other services available. Volt I use now as well. Just if I feel lazy and I don't know how much we actually think about maybe the working conditions of the people. Oopsie.
Keep going.
That actually do this. And also, I think it's probably all this tracking and immensely putting pressure on the workforce has been designed by some kind of designer, by some kind of clever data scientist, probably by some UXer. Next, please. And last but not least, I think, I mean, I've got loads of Amazon devices because I'm into voice user interface design as well. I order there regularly, try to do it less and less, but probably a lot of us would pick up a job with Amazon and get paid really, really well. Again, there's similar talks like the Google campus, just 10 minutes from where I live at Warschauer Brücke, if there's got to be an Amazon tower, which again would get an influx and an army of tech people, maybe destroying the rents and other things for the other people. And also, I think while Jeff Bezos is one of the most rich people on earth, or the most rich person on earth, you've got the workers in the warehouses that maybe need to pee in a bucket so they can actually make their shift targets that we have maybe created to track as well. Next. If we don't work for one of those, maybe there's another first world problem that Silicon Valley has got covered for us and that we could work for. So maybe the next startup, creating something that really only caters for our own tech bro and cis needs. Next. Next. Now we can jump over that one. And it phases me as well. I mean, I think there's a lot of people here that work maybe for a big well-known e-commerce brand in Berlin, beginning with a Z, that maybe some years ago, the claim would have been something like, we sell pants or we sell shoes. But now suddenly when you read these mission statements of companies, it's all blown up to something, yeah, like our global mission is to help consumers and communities thrive, blah, 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 blah. But I'd argue at the core of it, if we ask the 5 why questions, at the end of the day, a lot of it, what we're doing is just to make rich companies richer, actually, with our beautiful interfaces and our post-its that we're moving along. Next, please. So what has that got to do with empathy? Next. What has that got to do with being human-centered? Next, please. What has that got to do with solving problems? Or are we maybe actually creating more problems than we're solving, or different problems? Next, please. I know I could go on around forever and ever, and I know it's not all black and white. Next. There's loads of topics that are really more complex than just having a rant. I mean, coming from greenwashing to the Silicon Valley ideology, notions of privilege, self-gig, the gig economy, class. I think one of the C words that are not so popular, but which we probably have to have a look at as well, or something else that's really much more complex on a systems level, on an operating system level, that we cannot possibly solve in a talk like this or in a fireside chat like this. Next, please. So maybe in a language that you understand, it's definitely more complicated, and I appreciate that as well. Next, please. Nonetheless, yes, I think if you ask why 5 times, there's no way around asking this very unsexy operating system question. Next, please. That's not to say that the prototypes that have been around have been much more effective in the past, but I think this is also quite a true statement. Maybe there's something better. Maybe there's a best of both worlds. I don't know. I'm not the person to say that. Next, please. And in a nutshell, I think really us sitting here having the time to do this over lunch in our nice fancy offices, I think to a certain level we're all hypocrites, and I think that's fine. It's time to get over it. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. Let's get over it and get things done. Yeah. Next one. Finally, I think, yeah, this is sort of the angle I'm approaching the whole thing. And then I'm really excited to see what Randy thinks about that. And we can find some common ground, agree to disagree on stuff or agree on things. A lot of the stuff I've shown you are taken from this presentation, which was a keynote I held at the TwoFest last year. It's 85 slides altogether. And you can download them under this bit.ly URL, which we will add, and I think we'll share later on as well.
I think I can start. So this is a question for either Randy or Clive. You can take up. Like, how do you consider ethics in your own work? For example, Randy just shared about coming to Singapore and choosing Grab for the purpose it is kind of trying to fulfill. So how do you kind of in day-to-day work, where does this question of ethics come for you?
Yeah, I think maybe a concrete examples, because I think we were talking more about like the ethics of this choice of like where, what do I work on, where do I work, which I think is an important consideration. So scope it to them, today. One really practical place was that we were seeing the emergence really across our product organization, and maybe in some cases even like the business teams, kind of having an interest in what we end up kind of summarizing as game mechanics, right? But essentially, like, what are techniques and methods by which you can shape, shape behavior in these small ways, and can you kind of softwareize and productize those things? One that kind of goes like willy-nilly, like really fast, because like anyone can kind of read 3 articles and become like a armchair expert on this in like especially in a business environment, and that's like super risky with these things. One way we responded to that is we had a behavioral scientist on our team that we work with. And we said, first, let's explain all these things with a common terminology internally. Like, let's pull everything into like our knowledge set around this, so we can say like, here's how we view these, here's the vocabulary we use to talk about them, here's how they work. And then let's create essentially like a set of ethical guidelines, like how the organization can or should think about applying these or not. And then when we pulled all these things together, we sort of, we make the ethical guidelines the first part of the content consumption, right? So when people say like, hey, have you thought about game mechanics? We say, yes, in fact, you should check out our game mechanics like library. And we go to this internal URL, and the first thing you read is like the ethics of using mechanics to like shape people's behavior. Right. So this is really like practical and day to day, but it's also around education. Like that, at least at the moment, stops at education, meaning like we're trying to transfer information and understanding, but there's not then an operating model that checks against those, right? It's kind of on the individual's discretion, maybe their manager or someone to care about that and check it, So the mechanisms are not entirely established, but I think that's one like very recent and concrete example of how we're taking something into the design team and have done like active work to try to address the topic.
So when you say about mechanisms, you mean like certain code of ethics that organizations should have to make decisions?
Yeah, so we have this set of guidelines, right? But there's no accountability around them yet, right? So they're opt-in in a way, right? And they're not de facto, right? And so you have to do like really active work to make people aware of them, make people can remain aware of them, right? And then use them as a part of their like day-to-day work. I mean, it feels like it's a broad like cultural education question, I think, like across the organization. We're trying to help it by seeding it in design because there's people who cared about it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Randy.
Yeah.
Clive, would you have any views on this code of ethics in day-to-day work? Because this is something very subjective, as I was saying earlier as well. Like how do we set the boundaries? What is right and what is not? Like at your level, company level, community level.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it's down to, I think Kenneth intervened in the chat as well, saying actually it's not that subjective ethics. There's actually sort of a compass, but probably a discussion we can take later, and maybe have Kenneth join us as well, because he's really an expert on the topic. But what I'd say for myself, definitely things I'd look for in my past career is specifically because now I'm back in agency land. Before that, I worked as a freelancer for many agencies. Who are the clients and their business model that I'd actually want to support with my expertise, who I actually want to succeed. For the past year before I joined the agency Moku again, I worked for Adobe and not as a designer, but more in the sort of strategic development for Adobe XD. And we went to a lot of big clients as well. But I had like a deal with my boss, who was very open to these topics. Say if there's some clients who really do not want to take on, or that don't sort of that go against your morals or ethics, you do not have to do it, and we'll find a solution for other people to do that. And I actually use that quite a bit. In the past, it was also, for instance, in another agency I worked for, I refused to take part in a pitch for quite a lucrative client who turned out to be quite heavily involved in sort of the arms industry with some branches. And turned out it wasn't only me, it was 3 project managers who refused to do this job as well. In the end, we gave it to a freelancer, we lost the pitch, so we were all happy. But obviously that's your limits of ethical behavior, I think, because you've got this old saying, well, if I don't do it, someone else will do it. But then you can ask yourself, do I want to be that person, or do I move on? I think with everything, it's generally a question of love it, change it, or leave it. In that instance, it was cool. It could have turned out sour as well, but my boss said, yeah, that's fine. You don't have to do that. If you're not in there with your heart and only doing it half-assedly, you're not the right person for the job. And yeah, but what would have I done if we would have won that client? And then maybe the designer working on it would have been sick and I would have been asked to do it. I don't know, but at least I think these are sort of the boundaries you can set for yourself. And also in my current agency, which is sort of a small to mid-sized agencies, we're around about 40 people. We've got these discussions all the time. So what clients do we want to work more for, which maybe less? Maybe do we want to, ongoing discussion is maybe do we want to position ourselves a bit more to take on board companies that actively try to look at the global sustainability goals rather than maybe just selling more stuff. So I think that's a part, and that's really important for me. So I wouldn't have joined, because I was thinking after leaving Adobe, do I go back to freelance life? Do I go back to the agency world? If I decided to go back to agency world, I definitely would have not joined one that just takes any old client, and it doesn't really matter.
I feel like this topic is almost like really central. It's in that theme that you showed, Nav, this choice. This superpower of designers is a choice, or whatever that sentence was. And we talked before the event the other day about this exact topic, like trying to balance that, choosing to consider ethics somehow in your decision of what you work on, and balancing that with like, well, also I just need a job, or also I just need to get this experience. Maybe we can, yeah, you can, if you remember, like say some of the, like on that topic, maybe Randy, did you have something on that topic just to switch?
I suppose what comes to mind is this like, it's a question I spin around, and I think that many members of our team probably spin around, but I don't know that we have anything conclusive around it. And the scenario essentially looks like this. The organization is serving in part to create economic opportunity for a huge number of people that, from like a business standpoint, we would say operate on like the supply side of our marketplace. So these might be merchants, these might be food delivery partners, people giving rides, and a variety of other things. And one of the key considerations internally for like any sort of product choices we make, and then the design choices we make to like drive adoption of those features and things, is does it increase the earnings of those people? So this is one of these like top line like business metrics that aligns with that set of intentions. Yeah? Already resolving that at that level can be pretty like challenging, right? You just think like, does it like do the various sides of the marketplace win? Can we conceive this in such a way that's win-win-win? You're like, okay, that aligns with like what we see as our purpose in a way, like creating this economic opportunity. And so you could kind of stop there. I mean, it's very hard work to do, and that feels right and good. Like a lot of people would join the organization for that. But there remains this extra layer, which I find like really challenging and don't exactly know how to reconcile with, which is, the ways in which you do that, and in fact the unknown or unpredictable side effects of the ways in which you do that become really interesting and important space to consider, right? And can we take any, like, what of those unknowns can we make known so that it can inform our decision making? Yeah.
Any examples in your mind as you're saying that sentence, like the ways and the ways that we choose to do that?
I think, someone brought up in the chat, and I think it's an important topic, although I think there's reasonable amounts of kind of dialogue around it. Things like dark patterns in UX and things like that. And I would actually say that from my experience, actually being inside Grab, only once. So I've been in this organization for 2 years. Only once have I encountered something that, through my lens and like my understanding, I would consider a dark pattern. And it wasn't intentional. It was actually kind of accidental. It was just like bad, kind of incomplete product thinking. And we were able to, this went out, like this was out in the world. We were able to, essentially a person could easily opt into like a recurring charge and had a much harder time opting out, but it wasn't intentional. And so we were able to kind of unwind that and create a better, answer that was reasonable and ship that out. So in one sense, I'd say like I'm thankful that I don't feel like we've run into that. On the other hand, I feel like we should probably be running into that more often. Like I almost feel like maybe I need to tighten my filter, because I feel like I should be running into like ethical dilemmas more than I feel like I am. Not because of this organization or anything, I just mean in general, like as a human being who cares, I feel like I want to, work harder at making sure I'm doing it right. Yeah.
That's a really good point too, because like Nav mentioned, watching this, The Social Dilemma narrowed my filter, where I started noticing things more. It's just like, oh my God. And especially as a designer, thinking, how do I get people to interact and engage and keep coming back to my product or whatever? I'm like, oh my God, I'm just trying to take their time away from them.
There's there's been a raised hand by Kenneth. I think you wanted to say something at one moment in time. I think that might be a great input.
Hi, yeah. Sorry if it's okay, just to jump in. Let me turn my camera on so I can sort of say hi to people. Apologies in advance. I have a bit of a connectivity crisis, so there's a chance I might drop out. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons we aren't maybe running into as many ethical dilemmas as we think is because we're not trained to do that, right? You know, this is not something that has been prioritized in how we hire and train designers, PMs, software engineers. You know, we've regarded this as kind of this sort of abstract humanities topic rather than, you know, hardcore STEM, which is what we tend to have prioritized. And so we haven't learned to exercise what an ethicist would call moral imagination. You have to take stock of how this might affect people, not just now, but also in times to come. Technologies are what are known as multi-stable, right? They have lots of interpretations. They get used in different ways beyond the ones we anticipated. So we're not very good at just thinking in that way. So we need to get better at practicing that and training ourselves to think that way. And I think the other, one of the other things I point the finger at here is the idea of user centricity actually doesn't necessarily help us here because it creates an enormous blind spot. What it does is it teaches us that the only person that we care about is, you know, the end user. But, you know, we sort of hinted at this, you know, Clive mentioned, for example, something around this topic, that the user is not necessarily just this, you know, one person, this idealized, usually affluent white person on the west coast of the US, right? There's a plurality of users, there's a plurality of humans we haven't really understood very well. But there are also impacts now at internet scale that fall upon non-users. Like Airbnb is the classic example. Like if you live next door to an Airbnb, you have a crap time of it, even though you have nothing to do with the platform. So technologies can impact non-users. They can impact communities, groups, societies, nations, democracy, freedom, you know, all these kind of abstract concepts. And so we need more structured ways to think about those impacts and to decenter the user in our conversations and look at this broader set of stakeholders. So that's why we're maybe not particularly adept at spotting those ethical harms before they happen. That's what we need to get better at, essentially.
Super. Yeah, I can only second that. And also probably really getting into this notion of system thinking and beyond, looking what's involved there. Yeah, nice one. Thanks, Kenneth.
Yeah.
Sinead, while I have you here, I think Randy had a question for you and wants you to dive a little bit deeper into a comment that you said before. If I can jump in, Randy, do you remember the comment? It was about ethics isn't what was it?
Subjectivity.
Oh, subjective.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do clarify that point? That would be amazing.
Sure. You know, I'll make my point and then I'll step back because I absolutely don't want to dominate the discussion just because I'm sort of in this space. I think it's an easy conclusion to come to that ethics is subjective because again, we're not skilled at having those conversations. So generally those arguments tend to be kind of unproductive. They tend to be won by whoever's paid the most money. And so we sort of end up going, well, you know, it's an unwinnable discussion anyway. So it's all subjective. The way I like to think of it is ethics is more like a design problem. You know, you're given a design brief, and it may well be that there are lots of, you know, there might be several solutions that are good, that are viable. Maybe there's one great one, but 7 workable ones or whatever it might be. But there's also thousands and thousands of ways that are just plain wrong to address that problem. And of course, ethics is, you know, we had that definition up front. Ethics is about right and wrong. That's a normative thing, right? It requires judgment calls on what is good and what's bad. And if we do think that ethics is totally subjective, just opinion, then we just give up, right? Because this is all a meaningless discussion. Because, well, I think it's this, you think it's this, potato, potato, whatever, you know, let's not bother. If you allow people to kind of get away with that, then, you know, if someone says that genocide is a good thing, is that a valid ethical view? No, I don't think it is. I think there is enough common ground in human society that we would agree there are some things that are right and good across cultures. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for example, has been signed by dozens of nations as a kind of core grounding of what we think is morally correct, I suppose. I think sometimes people get into a bit of a fuddle over this because they think you can't prove an ethical case, right? It's not scientifically verifiable, which is true. You can't measure ethics, right? You can't do a brain scan and go, well, this is an ethical brain that's been activated. But there are things that are true that even, they're still true even if they're not scientifically verifiable. And there's sort of lots of little interesting philosophical refutations for that, which I won't bore you with. Final thing on that, though, is it is accurate to say that ethics is not fully relative, but people have different perspectives on ethics in different cultures, and we have to be respectful and mindful of that. And I think that's what people tend to mean when they say that it's subjective, is actually we have different opinions on these things. But it's okay to say that some cultures are more ethical than others. If we do that respectfully and carefully, it's okay to say that our approaches to ethics change over time. I think society is more ethical than it was 500 years ago. We have less slavery, we have children not forced to work as frequently in mines or in sweatshops, things like that. So you can say this overall trend is moving in the right direction without resorting to subjectivity, which pretty much just makes the whole argument unwinnable. Sorry for kind of going off on tangents, and I'll shut up and leave you to it, but I just wanted to chip that in. Thank you.
That was fantastic, and I think it covers a lot of topics. You just covered a lot of topics that we've had on our list to talk about.
I have something to add to this. I think about the subjective part. You say like this, in a broader sense, like design ethics or ethics is not subjective because we have to agree to certain minimum kind of standards of working in a certain way. But I think the question of subjectivity comes like, how do we apply in our day-to-day work? I gave you an example of like, I'm a vegetarian, and for the health of my company, I have to do work for a chicken fast food chain, for example. So that was a very subjective situation where I'm taking some kind of a decision. And subjectivity is also like a broader sense of norm depending on which context you're in. So what would be your take on that? Like, broader sense, we say some things are good, some things are bad. But in my son says in like, Jedi, and this Sith says like, what is dark, what is bad, and what is good, like who decides? So from that sense, I think this question of subjectivity kind of comes, when it comes to day-to-day work, there is a dilemma about it. So I think it'll be great to hear your thoughts, as well as Randy's and Clive's as well. So,
I mean, with respect to who decides, ethicists decide. That's their job, right? That's that whole branch of moral philosophy is set up precisely to answer those questions. And they do have relatively robust ethical lenses that they use to interrogate these issues, which again, too detailed to go into here. They're not formulae that you can crank out and get a result, right? It's not going to be you put something in the ethics machine and it tells you do this or not. You still, of course, have to do that interpretation. And I fully agree that these are personal decisions to be taken. I really don't like the kind of blanket prohibitions you sometimes hear from tech ethicists saying, you must never work for Uber. You must never work for Facebook. If you do, you have to quit. That's bollocks. That's the opposite of ethics for me. That's shutting down ethical debate. But we can use these tools and techniques that moral philosophers have created, centuries ago, some of them, and we can apply them contextually to our own problems and see where they get us. They at least give us a relatively defensible way to work through these problems for ourselves.
Maybe we should take someone else's question as well, because
I feel like we have lots of questions.
I have the list. So one is, can you design ethically for a non-ethical client?
Randy or Clive?
Yeah, it probably depends on the lens and what you mean by that. It's a difficult one, and it's also you could probably. I'll just take an example. I probably might be butchered for that. Say that the typical UX answer is it depends. End of discussion. That's it. But maybe if we say, well, is, let's say, McDonald's pushes this healthy food for children. Is that ethical within an unethical company? If you even think McDonald's is unethical, is that just greenwashing, or are you actually doing something good within and reach millions of people that you otherwise might not reach? I've had this discussion with vegan friends of mine as well. So I'm a flexitarian, but I'd like to be a vegan, but I'm too weak. But so, for example, do we buy plant-based products from meat manufacturers that are really tasty? Or do we support the companies that have been in this space from the outset? So you could say, for example, Mühlenhof is a big meat producer in Germany. They've now got a whole range of vegan meat substitutes. They're all very, very tasty. But do you want to? So if you work in that area and maybe do the branding and the website for those vegan products, that might be ethical. But the bigger picture is, what does it pay into? So I'd say it depends. And yeah, and I think it's also down to this, having a blacklist of your own companies that you wouldn't maybe want to work for. And that can be super subjective, because I've got some, and I know some other people have got others, and there's surprising results. For example, for me, it would be Axel Springer and News Corp, which I think, in my opinion, proactively make the world a shittier place with most of their products.
And in this event, there might be someone working there.
Yeah, it could be. And then you prove me wrong.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Time's up. And Randy didn't have a chance to answer that. Sorry.
Yeah. Did you have something burning, Randy, or should we try and do another question? But yeah.
Do another question, I think is good.
Yeah.
So the question here is like, is there a role for government and standardizing agencies to kind of bring some ethics in design and by extension technology?
Yeah, can I, I'd love Randy to answer this one. And GDPR was coming to mind, the European, like you said something about opting, it's opt-in, and something is opt-in instead of opt-out with this kind of, and GDPR came to mind because that's like you have to do it, and you have to, with emails, you have to unsubscribe or whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Probably most people do, but yeah, I'd love to know your perspective on that question.
Yeah, I think that my sense is yes, maybe from personal experience. I think that, so I was in the US when GDPR rolled out. I was working at an e-commerce organization that did a lot of communication and things, a lot of marketing communications and others. And now this particular organization, this is Etsy, e-commerce company that has presence there in Berlin. Basically, we took the standpoint that the sort of regulatory requirements were, the harshest, the most intense, right? The most limiting, but the most kind of, I'm going to use, end user, which I know I should consider it more. Now I know I should consider beyond the end user, but that was very positive or friendly to the users or customers in this case. And so we took that as basically the floor rather than the ceiling, and said, we'll just assume that that's the policy globally because it seemed like the most strict thing. So that has a sort of convenience and business implication standpoint from kind of standard operating procedure. You're we don't need to invent a bunch of different methods to do things and understand them based on geography and things in our global marketplace. We're just going to assume that's the standard everywhere and behave that way. So I think in this case, this regulatory body did something in one place, influenced in this case, an organization based in a different jurisdiction to change its behavior everywhere it operates. So to me, I think it was a pretty interesting example. Now it comes down to the choice we made, because we know at the same time we were consulting with other US tech companies about how they were going about this. And I think many reached a certain, at a certain level of scale, it was practical to them to say oh, no. Let's try to identify only the places where we have to do this so that we can continue to be more aggressive everywhere else until someone tells us otherwise. Yeah.
So it reminds me of the whole accessibility and WCAG guidelines that I think to some companies is just a box ticking exercise without actually caring about the greater notion of accessibility or inclusion. But I think there we have got standards and we have got rules, and that's a good thing, I believe. I also think if we look at the global development goals, the sustainable development goals by the United Nations, for example, that's a good compass to think maybe is what we're doing, even if it's not law. Does that answer, does it tick these boxes? And there's also something like the B corporations that sort of put upon themselves certain standards of, I think, ethical behaviors, how they conduct their business. So if you look up B Corp, something like Patagonia's in there, here's the do-gooder, Clean Canteen is in there, but also Kickstarter recently changed to be a B Corp, where they say they put purpose over profit. And then interestingly enough, 2 weeks later, you get an article about Kickstarter being more of a union busting operation, trying to keep self-organizing workers down. So interesting stuff. And I don't know if they lost their B Corp because of that. But I really think rules and regulations, maybe that's my German side as well, are super helpful. And you can break them, but maybe you should do so knowingly, rather than just say, oh, it's a free for all. And like Ken said as well, yeah, really, if you think about it, I don't know, a neo-Nazi is the same thing as someone from Antifa, because they're both extreme, which to my opinion is bullshit, because that's like a, let's not get into that, but that's like the horseshoe theory. It's saying that one end of the scale is just as bad as the other end, although it's totally different in my opinion. So I do think clear standards can be a good sort of North Star. And then if you derive from it, you can do it knowingly though, and you can discuss it. So yeah.
I think there's maybe this other, like, it points to the topic earlier, really about education, right? Which is, can we establish, standards and expectations around around education and content and awareness at like a professional practice level, right? If you look at maybe formalized education or even like certification inside, businesses or something like that. Could a government expect that an organization like ours train all of its team members around the topic, right? That'd be another way to take the like regulatory requirements and push them at like a system level. Yeah.
I think that's a great one as well, because we're talking about education. I believe there's a lot of sort of newcomers or people that are just looking for their first jobs in this session. I mean, an approach I always loved was, for instance, in Austin, Texas, there's the Austin Center for Design, which has been founded by an ex-Frog employee, John Colco, who you might know, quite exposed with lots of tattoos and funnels and that. But their notion is you learn interaction design in a 1 year, so not bootcamp style, but a 1 year very intensive course with social entrepreneurship. So from the outset, you learn you can actually combine being a designer, doing designy things, but doing it for another purpose as well. And I think these approaches are really good. And it could also be something, if you can afford to, and to ask these questions at interviews, and just ask, hey, I really love your design system, and I like your your foosball table, and have you got any clients that you wouldn't take on as an agency, or are there any things that you wouldn't do? And I think it's like asking for vegan food in restaurants. The more this happens, people might think, okay, even if they only think we're losing business if we don't cater for that.
Well, there could be a conference on this topic actually. Now I think now this is coming into rhythm, and I realize that now we are getting like more warmed up to this, because they're fantastic questions. And I know that there's no time for this, but this I would like you guys to just keep this question, and maybe later on we can collate your thoughts and put in form some kind of a blog. I think this is very important. Can businesses really shift to ethical approaches of their business if their business model relies on unethical practices, for example, farming data?
Hold it up again.
Yeah, so this is a fantastic question, because this is a question that impacts a lot of people. Like when you're talking about farming data, we are talking about big data, we are talking about platforms. So how do we bring, we can do small little ethical things, but the bigger business model relies on something which is not ethical.
So interesting, man. This makes me think of, there's a program at Carnegie Mellon University, I think a PhD program in what I think they call transformational design. A woman named Terry Irwin and another guy, I can't remember her name, but Terry Irwin used to be one of the partners at Meta Design back in the day. Started this program, and this gets, I think, at this interesting question when you asked about like, can an organization kind of become ethical essentially. because these sound like big. And the concept of this whole transformational design program is essentially like, how can you design for such wicked long scale problems that like your design solution needs to accommodate the fact that it may be like multi-generational to get to the outcome. So like, how do you, if you're trying to work with a government, how do you design into your process the fact that like the power structure, or the political party in power in that government will likely change over the time of the course of this project, right? And this feels almost at that scale. Like, how do you take a successful organization that's maybe built on unethical foundations? Like, would it be possible to take them on a journey somewhere else? Maybe, but it'd be crazy, crazy complicated, crazy complex, but sounds exciting too.
Yeah, I think we are almost, thanks a lot, Randy. And I think after this event, rather than getting, of course, we discussed the topic, we unlayered it a bit, but I think there are more questions than answers. And I feel this needs a follow-up, either in the form of an event or some form of mini conference, because this is a great topic actually, and we had experts here. I think we had great, I don't know how to pronounce the name. It's Kenneth, yeah? It was absolutely fantastic listening to you. And there is another person who is also expert in ethics, Zik Rafit, and I wanted him to speak as well a bit, but I think we don't have time. But surely I would like to do something more with this, and where we have more time and more structure, where these things could be discussed and something meaningful could come out of it. Any closing words, Randy and Clive and Dee, please, before we close, maybe a minute each.
Yep, maybe just I'll quickly use the opportunity. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, this could go on forever. I agree, a conference or maybe a dedicated meetup regularly would be something. I'd definitely be up for that. And I'd also like to, if there are any parents in the room and are still there that are in design, I'd like to plug a new sort of community idea I'm just trying to set up called Parents at UX, where I sort of ask myself the questions, what can we as designing parents, maybe can we use our methods and our tools to become better parents, and then maybe open source this to every parent around. So under this bit.ly, there's a quick survey, just 5 questions. And if you'd like to be involved in that, if you've got 2 cents, and if you're a designing parent, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, it would be lovely to see you at our book club, which we need to reactivate a little bit. And here's a URL to 85 slides with sort of material that I mentioned. It's got books, it's got a survey I did, and all sorts of stuff. So it's sort of my brain fart on 85 slides.
Thank you so much, Clive. It's so much information and such good information to share.
Randy, what do you have?
Oh yeah, gosh. Well, this is awesome. One, thank you for having me. Like, this seems super cool, and I feel like as we kind of reach the momentum at the end of this, it really feels like there's just so much interest in the topic. I feel like more energized leaving than when we started, which is always a good sign. Just super cool. Yeah, man, I think that just really seeing the activity and engagement in like the chat channel and people's questions and stuff, to me is super exciting. That there's definitely like a community interest around the topic. I feel like I'm in the same position of like interest in learning as everyone else here. So I just feel like really lucky to find some like-minded or like-hearted people.
We can even share with people if you guys are interested. I can quickly share with you the questions that we had.
Yeah.
So that,
and if anyone has to run to a meeting that we're keeping you from, don't worry, goodbye. You'll get an email with all the links and everything. But yeah, this is great to show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all, bye.
So thank you very much.
Last I do is not for myself, but if you're all struggling maybe to find your purpose a little bit and thinking about these ethics, I've joined a cohort of, I think it's about 60 people, and there's a regular thing. It's called the Purpose Fellowship, which is an 8-week program. You can Google that. The Purpose Fellowship, set up by an organization called TBD. They used to be called The Changer, from Berlin, and the ARC, which is a coaching company, and sort of tries to bring you, because like I've got 100 browser tabs in my head and all sorts of things I could do. It sort of tries to help you find your real purpose professionally and maybe as a person by doing applying different techniques like peer coaching and impact talks from a professional coach. So that's something maybe where you're still a bit confused and you're looking for your own ikigai or purpose as a designer. I'd recommend checking out the Purpose Fellowship with TBD. It's also work, but currently I'm in week 3 and I really feel I'm benefiting from it to sort of focus my efforts a bit more.
Sure, guys. I think we have to now. We don't want to keep people in this. We wanted to take a group photo, but I think we can do it another time now. So thank you very much for joining us. And have a great lunch, and we'll have a great dinner time in Singapore.